So have you ever been in a storm? And I'm talking like a real storm, a storm where you start to feel like you might even be a little bit of danger right now. I remember just not that long ago, me and Tia were hiking and we were up in the mountains and it was this beautiful hike. We made it to the top and we're up there hammocking, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, these giant storm clouds start rolling in. So we start packing up our hammocks quick, and our skin starts to feel a little tingly, right? The air is becoming electrified, and if there is a lightning storm, the last place you want to be is up on a mountain. And so we are sprinting down this mountain, this hike that took us like an hour and a half to get up. We're down in like 30 minutes, okay? No joke. It is full sprint because we are feeling so exposed. We're like, if things go bad, we have no protection right now. And so we are running as fast as we can down this mountain. There's this little bit of almost we're in danger right now as we're running down. And the Bible is full of stories of storms. And many times they're representing this feeling of being afraid or out of control. And we use this language of storms all the time. We'll say things like storms are going to come into your life. And by that, we just mean things are going to happen that make you feel afraid and out of control and even a little bit in danger. And even right now feels like we're in a big storm, right? 2020 has felt like a big storm that is out of control and we are just trying to weather through. And so I want to look today at a famous storm in the Bible, a storm found in John chapter 6, verses 15 to 21. And this famous storm actually happens right after another super famous story in the Bible, the feeding of 5,000. And a lot of times people don't know that these two stories are connected, but we're going to see that they are today. And so let's dive right in and begin in John chapter 6, starting in verse 15. It said, Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. All right, he's just fed 5,000. They're so amazed. They're literally like, let's make this dude our king. This is so cool. All right, verse 16. When evening came, his disciples went down to the lake, where they got into a boat and set off across the lake for Capernaum. By now it was dark, and Jesus had not yet joined them. And a strong wind was blowing, and the waters grew rough. They had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, and then they saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water, and they were frightened. But he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." Then they were willing to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the shore where they were heading. Now you hear this, and you might think, isn't John leaving out like a really important part of this story? What about Peter, right? Haven't we heard this story about Peter walking on water too? Well, a lot of times when we read this story, we read it from the book of Matthew. And Matthew tells us about Peter walking on water, right? And we've heard the story, and it's always taught like Peter gets out, he's feeling great, he's walking with Jesus for a little bit, and then all of a sudden he looks around and starts to sink, and he's like, "Save me, Jesus!" Right? And the lesson is always, we all fall sometimes, but just keep your eyes on Jesus, and you'll be okay. Right? And it's true, and I'm so glad that that story is in the Bible because it's encouraging. But I find it interesting that John doesn't talk about it at all when he's sharing this story of Jesus walking on the water. Why is that? It's really because John's chapter in his book of the Bible is a really good movie script. All right, you may have heard me say this before, but it helps me to remember the difference of all of the Gospels, right? We got 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, 4 stories or accounts, eyewitnesses account of the life of Jesus. And they're all a little bit different. And so I use The Lord of the Rings as an example because that's what I grew up with and I love it. All right, Matthew is like the original book of Lord of the Rings. All right, it's got the full story, it's got a lot of detail, it's going to give you the most of what people are thinking and how their internal thoughts are. All right, if you're like wondering, hey, I've heard this story in the Bible, where is it in? If it's about Jesus, it's probably in Matthew. He has almost all the stories. All right, then you have Luke. Luke is like the revised, expanded collector's edition of the book. All right, it's got more detail than any other book. It gets really, really precise. It's trying to answer all the questions that they thought the first book didn't answer. All right, it's like where you really go if you want to get super in-depth into some of the stories. And then you have Mark. I love Mark because Mark is like a teenage boy just telling you about Lord of the Rings. All right, it's only the action scenes, doesn't really give you much of what people are thinking, focuses the most on Jesus' death, all right? Because if you ask, a middle school or high school boy about the life of Jesus, they're just going to tell you all the cool miracles he did and that he died this really terrible death, right? That's all they remember of Jesus. And so that's Mark. And then you have John. And John's gospel is like a good movie script. Because what a good movie can do, it can take everything that was in the books and put it into 2.5 hours, right? Or if you're Avengers, you can get away with like 4 hours. But normally 2.5 hours for a movie. And so John has to decide what he thinks is important enough to be included into the purpose of his book. And John's entire gospel is focused on proving to you that Jesus is God. In fact, I found this really cool, interesting fact as I was studying the book, that there is at least one reference to Jesus being God in every single chapter of John's gospel. So if you want to challenge this week, if you're bored, read through the book of John, see if you can highlight and find the one, at least one time, every chapter that Jesus is referred to as God. And so we have this story of Jesus walking on water, and John leaves out the part about Peter because it wasn't important to proving that Jesus was God, right? John's book is about Jesus, not about the disciples. And so I find it fascinating that he chooses to leave that out because he wants us to be so focused on Jesus. And so here's the first thing I want to look at from John's story, and one thing I want to teach us from this storm. And it's this: there are times when God sends us into a storm. All right, there are times when God sends us into a storm. Again, in verse 17, it says his disciples got into a boat and set off across the lake for Capernaum. And in the other Gospels, it actually says that Jesus made them get into the boat. All right, and so Jesus says, hey, you guys get in the boat, head over to Capernaum. I'm going to go pray by myself a little bit. I'll meet you there. And so they start heading off, and Jesus goes and prays. And then they get into the storm. And here's the thing. Jesus knew they were going to encounter a storm, right? Jesus wasn't just up there praying and like, oh no, like, is today Tuesday? Crap, Tuesday was that storm. I just sent them into the storm. I totally forgot, right? That wasn't Jesus. Jesus knew what was going to happen. He knew that they were going to go into a storm. So the question is, why would he send his disciples into a boat, into a storm on purpose? Like, if I'm a disciple, like when I'm with Jesus, I'm not even packing an umbrella, right? Like we already know earlier, just a few chapters earlier, Jesus already had calmed a storm in front of his disciples. And so if I'm a disciple, I'm thinking, dude, this is sweet. Like Jesus literally controls the weather. So when we're traveling, like I'm not even bringing an umbrella. He's not purposely going to make us like go through a storm. That makes it so much harder. Like Jesus wants to get where he's going quickly. So he's always going to keep the weather nice. It's going to be sunny and 80 every time we travel, right? If I'm with Jesus, no umbrella needed. You might be thinking, TJ, that's a little extreme, okay? But the reality is a lot of the times this is how we view our lives as Christians, right? We think if we follow Jesus, then life is going to be easy. We're never going to experience hard things coming into our lives. All right, we hear the Bible talk about storms and trials and hard times, and we're like, yeah, they're part of life. We understand. But then when it happens to us, our first reaction is like, come on, Jesus, why is this happening to me? Like, why are you letting me go through this? What did I do to deserve this? I don't need this. Why is this happening to me? Right? We have bought into this Western or American idea of Christianity that to follow Jesus means nothing bad's ever going to happen to you. To follow Jesus means that he's going to make you have the greatest life you can have and protect you from everything. Right? That is not true at all. On other parts of the world, other sides of the world, being a follower of Jesus means your life is literally at danger every single day. Now, I'm so thankful we live in a country as messed up as it is and as much fixing as still needs to happen, we do get to at least worship Jesus without fearing for our lives every day. And I'm so thankful for that. But it has also made us almost numb to what it means to suffer for Jesus. Right? The idea of our lives being inconvenienced because we follow Jesus is almost something that we never have to think about. And because of that, we have become wimps when it comes to storms in our lives. We've become like my best friend who lives in Southern California and used to tell me when it would rain, his parents would text him, drive safe, the streets are super wet and dangerous right now. All right, because it never rains in California, so anytime it does, it's like the world is ending for them. We've become soft and wimps when it comes to trials and storms happening in our lives. And because of that, we also can give the enemy way too much credit at times, right? Because if we believe this lie that to follow Jesus means nothing bad is ever going to happen, then every time something bad does happen, we just assumed it must be the enemy trying to attack us, right? We go to Starbucks and they mess up our order, and so we're Instagramming, devil trying to ruin my special time with Jesus this morning, hashtag not today, Satan, right? No, your barista just messed up and gave you the wrong drink. All right, it happens. COVID-19 comes, and our first thought is the devil is trying to shut down churches. That was his goal. He just wants to make sure that we can't meet in person, and he's trying to kill the church. No, maybe it's just from how we treat our planet, and this is just a really bad virus that's hitting us right now. Now, I'm not dismissing that there is a real enemy of God and an enemy of us who's against what God wants, right? And I'm not saying that every single bad thing that happens, God wanted it to happen, all right? But what I am saying is let's not give the enemy so much credit. Sometimes we're going to go through storms, and it wasn't the devil who led the disciples into the storm. It was Jesus who let them go out in the boat knowing that they were going to hit a storm. And so why would he do that? Why are there times that Jesus leads us into a storm? It's because storms are what God uses to get our attention and teach us things that we miss sometimes. All right, this is true with the disciples. Why did Jesus send them into the storm? Mark actually explains why in his telling of it. In Mark chapter 6, 51 to 52. He says, they were completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. See, the loaves, it refers to that feeding of the 5,000 that just happened. Jesus tried to teach the disciples this lesson about him through the feeding of the 5,000, and they totally missed it. They weren't even paying attention. They were just so focused on the food, they didn't learn the lesson God had for them. And so in order to get their attention and teach them what he needed to teach them, he sends them out into a storm to get their attention. And so let's have a new way of thinking about storms, right? Let's stop thinking about all hard things that come into our life as being punishments or being from the enemy, and instead realize maybe God's using this to get our attention and teach us something that we needed to learn. And if we see storms as a learning opportunity and not a punishment, it'll change the way we view the hard times we go through. All right? The second thing I want to help us see from the story, if we view storms as this way, is that a new understanding of storms does not fear them. All right? A new understanding of storms won't fear them. There was this old show on Discovery Channel called Storm Chasers. All right, I loved this show. If you've never seen Storm Chasers, these guys are crazy. All right, they have a storm chasing vehicle and little cameras, and they go around chasing down tornadoes trying to get an intercept, meaning they're trying to get hit by a tornado on purpose. All right, why would anybody do this? It's because they know that there is some information that can only be learned by going through the storm. Right? There are some things that they can only learn by being hit by a tornado. And because they know that that's the only way they're going to get this, they chase that storm. They're excited to be hit by a tornado and learn something that they wouldn't have been able to learn another way. See, what if a new understanding of storms and things that happen in our life is we start to look at them like a storm chaser. Start to realize maybe there's something that I can learn about God or myself by going through this that I would not have been able to learn without being hit by this storm. See, what if we stop fearing storms and trials and difficulties and instead we start chasing them, so to speak? See, do you know who is one of the greatest storm chasers of all time? It's this guy named Paul in the Bible. All right? See, religious leaders would come to Paul and say, Paul, we are going to kill you if you don't stop teaching people about Jesus. And you know what Paul's response was? Hey, to die is gain, man. It's only going to be better if I die. Okay, fine then, they say, we will let you live, but it's going to be miserable. And Paul's response is, hey, to live is Christ. I live through him. Right? Okay, fine. We will throw you in prison if you don't stop talking about Jesus. Paul says, okay, I'm going to convert everyone who's in the prison, including the guard, and now even more people are going to be sharing Jesus with everybody. Okay, fine, we're going to torture you if you don't stop teaching about Jesus, they said. And Paul's response is, I don't consider the current suffering worthy to be compared with the future glory. Right? There's literally no adversity, no trial, no hardship that Paul endured that he wasn't like, I'm going to learn something from this and I'm going to be able to share Jesus through this. See, there was nothing that he went through that was too much for him to not be able to see there's a purpose for what I'm going through. Right? He wasn't afraid of tough times because he knew that there were things that could be learned by going through the storm. Now, I'm not saying that we should just go through all hard things that happen to us with this fake smile and be like, I'm so happy that I'm suffering right now, right? Like, that's not what I'm talking about. It's not this fake, I'm so glad things are miserable, okay? That's not what we're talking about. What we are talking about is this idea of viewing hard times as there's something I can learn from getting through this, right? The difference is we don't go through storms or hard things in our life without hope like other people, right? When other people go through this stuff and it feels like their world is crumbling, they have nothing to look for. We can go through those and say, even though it sucks right now and I don't like it, there's something better on the other side. There's something I'm going to learn about God if I can get through this. Okay, because here's the things about storms, and I'll finish with this, is storms actually have the power to get you where you were going faster than you would have been able to by yourself. Right? A good captain knows if you encounter a storm and you can hold on to your sails and you can keep your ship pointed straight, when you come out of that storm, you will be farther along on your destination than you ever could have gotten by yourself. See, if we can get through storms and keep our eyes on God, we will get through those and we will be farther along in our spiritual journey than we would have ever been without going through that storm. Can we become storm chasers and realize that storms have the power to teach us things and move us farther in our spiritual development than we ever could ourselves? Can we have a small amount of excitement when we start to feel difficult things happening? All right, not we love this and we're so happy, but an excitement of, I'm going to learn something through this. All right, God, this is tough and you're getting my attention and I want to learn what it is you're trying to teach me. See, a new understanding of storms views difficulties that we encounter not as negative things to be afraid of, but as growing opportunities if we can get through them. See, this doesn't mean that it's going to be easy. It doesn't mean that there's not going to be legitimate obstacles and legitimate pain that we go through. All right? But what being a storm chaser means is that we don't go through these difficulties like those with no hope. Okay, we go through storms knowing that we will come out the other side farther along than we ever would have been, and we will have learned something that we could not have learned without having this experience. See, even after 2020, when we get through this craziness of 2020, there will be real change and real things that we've learned and have changed as a country and as a world that we would not have been able to do without going through this storm. See, that's the hope that we have as Christians, to say, even if things look terrible right now in our world, we know that if we get through this, there will be good, positive change, and God promises to still take care of us when we get through this storm. And so the storm that you are going through right now is not God abandoning you. All right, you are not alone right now. And so instead, let us face these storms head on, knowing that God is with us. There is a purpose for this, and there's something we're going to learn when we get through this storm. That's what it means to be a storm chaser, and that's what we need to be in this world.